Okay, y'all, this video is going to review how to find the area of several different polygons. Now, a polygon is a closed shape with straight lines. So you've learned about tons of different polygons in elementary school. And the four we're going to be reviewing how to find the area of are parallelograms, rectangles, triangles, and trapezoids. Those are shapes that you learned to find the area of in 6th grade and even before that for rectangles. And we're going to take the time in this section of our video to review how to use the formulas for those four and how to solve problems using those formulas. All right, so our first problem we're going to do is on the screen. I would like for you to take notes in your journal as we solve through this. So you should be practicing the steps that I do of writing down the formula and plugging the numbers in and solving. So some things, well, let's read the problem first. Ted cut a parallelogram from an index card as shown below. What is the area of Ted's parallelogram in square inches? So it gives us a picture of it, and it tells us that it is a shape that's called a parallelogram. So a parallelogram is a four-sided figure with two pairs of parallel sides. So we can see that the top and the bottom are parallel, and that these slanted lines on the sides are parallel. It gives you a line through the middle. That is a line that's showing you the height, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But the actual shape that we're looking at is this figure right here, and that is called a parallelogram. So the first thing, anytime we're dealing with the measurement of any shape, is we want to find the formula. So you guys have practiced these up to this point in the Nearpod, and you have a formula chart. It's also linked in Google Classroom for you, and that formula chart tells us A equals BH. So write that formula down on your paper. The things that we need to identify here are what is the B and what is the H. Now, B stands for the base. So in this parallelogram right here, the base is going to be 4.5 inches, okay? Often the base will be on the bottom, not always, but it's going to be the length of this side of the parallelogram. Now, the base and the height always form a L shape. Okay, they're always going to form a right angle on them. And so we see right here that this little square, that indicates a right angle. So the height in this particular shape, the parallelogram, is not going to be one of the sides. So it's very tempting to want to use 3.5 as the height of this parallelogram, but that's actually a slanted line. That's not our height. Our height is going to go, it's going to be this up and down line right here that it tells us is 3. So I'm going to label that with an H. Never use the slants or the slanted side. So you never want to use those slanted sides whenever we are finding the area of a parallelogram. And the definition of a parallelogram is it has two pairs of sides that are parallel. So we talked about that at the beginning of this problem, that this side and the side on the right are parallel, and then the top and the bottom are parallel. That means they're never going to touch each other. So now we're going to solve using that formula. So if you haven't written it down already, write down A equals BH. As we learned in the little match it earlier, the A stands for area, B stands for base, and H stands for height. So underneath it, we're going to plug in. We don't know the area, so leave A equals. You should be writing all of this with me, practicing the steps. The B, we're going to plug in the number that represents the base, which is 4.5 times the height. When you have BH, when you have a letter by a letter or a number by a letter, those are saying that you're going to multiply those. So we're going to do 4.5 and we're going to multiply that times the height. Now remember, the height is 3. We're not using 3.5 because that does not represent the height of the whole figure. So all we need to do now is 4.5 times 3. So I'm going to give you a second to multiply 4.5 times 3. And once you have multiplied it, put your answer into the question that pops up. All right, so you should have gotten 1, 3, and 5, and then there is one place after the decimal point here. So if we loop it over once, then you should get that your area is 13.5. Always include our units, and our units are inches, and we measure area in square units. So it's going to be square inches or inches squared. So that was problem number 1, using the formula to find the area of a parallelogram. Now remember, you always have these formulas on your formula chart, so make sure you're using that every single time to look at. You don't have to have them memorized. You want to make sure you're using the correct formula to solve for what they're asking, in this case area, and the shape that they were asking about, which is a parallelogram. All right, next problem. In your journal, write down number 2. I'm going to read the story for us. It says, Anthony designed a triangular sign. He would like to paint the entire sign bright yellow so that everyone can see it. The base is 3 feet and the height is 6 feet. How many square yards will Anthony have to paint? So first thing to focus on anytime you're solving a problem is, what is the question asking? How many square yards will Anthony have to paint? Well, it doesn't say whether we're looking for area or perimeter or volume or circumference. It doesn't say anything like that, but it does give us a clue when it says square yards. Square yards means that we're going to find the area of the shape, because area is measured in square units. The next thing we need to know is, what shape are we talking about? It says it's a triangular sign. So if it doesn't give you a picture, it's going to tell you what the shape is. So let's draw a picture. So on your journal, draw yourself a triangle, just a simple little triangle here. And it says he wants to paint the entire sign bright yellow so that everyone can see it. The base is 3 feet. So the base of a triangle is going to be similar to what we learned in parallelogram. The height and the base are always going to form a right angle. So they're always going to form that L. Okay, well, we don't see in this triangle that it's not a right triangle. If it was a right triangle, if it looked like this, then the base and the height would be the two sides that are perpendicular to one another. But if it's not a right triangle like this one that we drew, then you're going to use the bottom of the triangle here. So let's call this the base, and let's label it 3 feet. Then we're going to need to find the height by making a perpendicular line that goes inside of the triangle. So sometimes if it's not a right triangle, all the times it's not a right triangle, you have to make a line in the middle of the triangle in order to make the height. If it's a right triangle, then the base and the height will be the two sides of the triangle that form that right angle. And it tells us the height is 6 feet. So let's label that on our triangle. Height is equal to 6 feet. So we have our two measurements labeled, the base and the height. The formula is the next thing we want to use. So on your formula chart, you see that the formula for the area of a triangle is A equals 1/2 BH. So write that formula down with some space underneath it to do some work. Now 1/2 BH means the area equals 1/2 times the base times the height. When we have all those squashed together, mushed together, that means that you're going to multiply each of those. So area equals 1/2 times base times height. So now underneath it, we plug in the numbers. So 1/2 times the base, which is, we see here, 3, times the height, which we labeled is 6. Now, if it gives you the length of the slanted sides here, we don't need to use those. All we need to find area is the length of the base and the height. So now we're going to multiply. You can multiply these in any steps that you need to. So 3 times 6 is 18. I chose that step first because I could do that easily in my head. Now we have 1/2 times 18. Now multiplying something times a half is the same thing as dividing it by 2. So you could think of it as 1/2 times 18 and actually multiply the fraction, or you could just ask yourself, what's half of 18? Well, I know that half of 18 is 9, so the area is 9 square feet. So make sure that you use the right formula for the right shape. If it doesn't give you a picture, then draw a picture in your journal, plug in the numbers in the right place, and then solve. That's it, easy peasy. Number 3 says, a rectangular window has a perimeter of 40 centimeters. If the base of the window is 8 centimeters, what would be the area of the rectangle? So the first thing to identify is, what shape is it asking us about? The question says, what would be the area of the rectangle? So it tells me right there the shape is a rectangle. It'll either give you a picture of the shape or it will tell you what the shape is. So now we want to draw a rectangle. So on your paper, draw yourself a rectangle. I'm going to make mine look like this. And the next thing we want to do is identify, what is it asking us to find about the rectangle? So we need to read the story again to help us know that. The question that we underlined says, what would be the area of the rectangle? So area is what we were looking for. So on your formula chart, you're going to look and find where it says area of a rectangle. You don't have to have that memorized. It tells you. So the formula for the area of a rectangle that it says on your chart is A equals BH. Or another way you might have learned it in elementary school is area equals length times width. That works fine too. That means the same thing as base times height. That's just how they put it on our chart. So sometimes a rectangle could be a square. So a square is a special type of rectangle. So if it's asking you about a square, you're going to use that same formula. The height and the base also, just like with all the other shapes, form a right angle. So if you're going to look for that right angle to find the height and the base. And then all 4 corners of a rectangle have right angles. That's a little symbol for angles. So those are just some characteristics about rectangles that we need to know. So let's see what the question is asked, or what the information the question gives us is. A rectangular window has a perimeter of 40 centimeters. This is weird. So it's telling us the perimeter, well, my pen is going crazy. The perimeter is 40 centimeters. I apologize for my terrible writing. My pen has a mind of its own. Then it tells us the base of the window is 8 centimeters. So I'm going to label one of the sides the base. It doesn't really matter which one's the base and which one's the height. A rectangle is going to have 2 long sides and 2 short sides. So you just want to make sure that you label the long and the short differently. So I chose to use the longer side as 8 centimeters. So we're going to have to use this information about perimeter to help us to find the short side, because we don't know the height of the rectangle. And in order to find area, we have to know both the base and the height. So we're going to use what we know here to find our height so that we can plug it into our formula. So how are we going to find what the height is using the perimeter? Well, we need to know what perimeter is. Perimeter is going to be the distance all the way around the rectangle. So let's think about what we know about the sides of the rectangle. If this side is 8, then what is this side across? That side's 8. So we know that this is 8 and this is 8, but we don't know what these two are, but we do know that they're the same. So 8 plus 8 plus height is going to equal 40. So let's think about how we could figure out what that h is. So h plus 8 plus 8 is equal to 40. Well, let's solve for the missing part, just like we know how to solve equations. So 8 plus 8 is 16. So I already know 2 of the sides make 16, and then the other 2 sides are going to be the same. So let's subtract 40 minus 16 to see what's left over. 24. So that means that the height plus the height equals 24. So if we just take two numbers and add them together to the same number, we should get 24. Well, to solve that, I'm going to go backwards. What's half of 24? 12. So the height would be 12. So now, since I know the base and the height, now I can find the area. So this one added a little more difficulty to it because it made us work backwards to find the height using the perimeter before we could find the area. So now let's write down the area formula. Area equals base times height. And we're going to plug in those numbers. A equals, B is 8. So we're going to plug that in under the B. And H is 12. And base and height by each other mean base times height. So to solve this problem, you're going to do 8 times 12. Go ahead and do it. Hopefully you got an answer of 96. So our area is 96, square centimeters. And our last shape that we are going to review is right here. So write number 4 down on your paper. The problem says, Abby made a sign shown below. If she wants to cover the sign, how many square inches of material will she need? So let's first look at the picture because it doesn't tell us what shape we're working with. We need to know what this shape is called. So when we look at this shape, we see that there are 2 right angles, which means that there are 2 sides that are parallel to one another, and then 2 sides that are not parallel to one another. If there is only one pair of parallel sides, we call this a trapezoid. Often you might be more familiar with seeing a trapezoid look like this, like a Pizza Hut sign. That is a trapezoid. That follows the definition of it having one pair of parallel sides. This is also a trapezoid. So trapezoids can look a variety of ways. It can have right angles, but it doesn't have to have right angles. So first of all, we need to just be familiar with the different ways that trapezoids may look. So we are going to deal with trapezoids here, and we want to know what we're finding out about the trapezoid. It says she wants to cover the sign, and we're going to figure out how many square inches she will need. So cover is one of those words we talked about the other day when we did our area and circumference sort with circles. It's the same idea with shapes that aren't circles. If you're going to cover something, then you need to fill the entire inside of it, not just the outside edges. So that tells me we're going to find the area. That square inches phrase also tells me we're going to find area because we measure area in square units. So we need to find the formula. On your chart, this one's a little complicated, so make sure you reference your chart as you're writing it anytime you're dealing with trapezoids. The formula is going to be A equals 1/2 B1 plus B2. All that means is base 1 plus base 2, and then there's an H, meaning times the height. The reason it says B1 and B2 is there are 2 bases on a trapezoid, and the bases are always going to be parallel. B1 and B2 are always going to be the 2 sides that are parallel. So parallel means they don't touch. So it may look like that or it may look like that, but they are going to be the 2 sides that won't ever touch each other because they are parallel to one another like railroad tracks. Next, B1 and B2 are not always the top and the bottom. Sometimes, depending on the way that it is positioned, it could be on the side. Like I could draw my trapezoid like this, and the B1 and B2 are going to be these 2 sides right here, not the top and the bottom, because these 2 are the parallel sides to one another. So be careful with that. The height is always going to be the distance between B1 and B2. And I want you to write down, never use the slant. So we're never going to use the slanted side, which is right here. I'm going to put an X to remind you, don't use that, okay? So in this particular example, let's call this B1. It doesn't really matter which one's B1 and B2. Let's call this B2. This slanted line you're never going to use. And then this line right here, that would be our height. So our height is always going to be the distance between B1 and B2. It's going to make a right angle with B1 and B2. The height, just like a parallelogram, the height may not be on the side of a shape. It may be in the inside. So we can look at that a little bit later. So now let's find the area of this figure. So let's write the formula down with some space underneath it to work. A equals 1/2 base 1 plus base 2 times the height. So write that formula down. Now we're going to plug in what we know. Area equals 1/2 times base 1 and base 2. So let's look at our figure right here. Base 1 and base 2 have to be parallel. So in this trapezoid right here, the two that I've already colored in orange, those are my base 1 and base 2. So let's write that in our parentheses, 20 plus 25 times the height. And the height has to be the distance between base 1 and base 2. So that means it's going to be the line that is perpendicular to them or making an L with them. So this is going to be my height. So my bases, doesn't matter which one's base 1 and base 2. You can reverse those and it'd be totally fine. The height, however, has to be 20. 22 is the slant, so we definitely don't want to use 22. So we're going to multiply this times 20. Now, it's a lot of steps. We're just going to take it one step at a time using order of operations that you learned last year. GEMDAS or PEMDAS tells us to start with the grouping symbols or the parentheses. So A equals 1/2 times, we're going to do 20 plus 25, which is 45 times 20. Now we're left with all multiplication. You could do that in any order you want. You could do 1/2 times 45 times 20, or 20 times 45 times 1/2. And remember, times 1/2 is the same as dividing by 2. So you can think of that as dividing your number by 2. So I'm going to give you a minute to multiply those three numbers together to find out what 1/2 times 45 times 20 is, and input your answer into the question that pops up. Okay, so I'm going to do 45 times 20. Or again, you could have done this in any order as long as you got the same answer. Oops, I'm running out of space. So that gets me 900. So that is A equals 1/2 times 900. And then half of 900 is my last step here. So to do that, I could divide 900 by 2. I know it can fit into 9 4 times. And I get a 1, bring down my 0. 2 can fit into 10 5 times. And then it can fit into 0 times. Sorry, I'm running out of room. So my answer is A equals 450 square inches. Hopefully that is what you got as well. Awesome job. So these problems can all be solved using formulas. The formula tells you exactly what to do and what order to do it. The important part is that we choose the right formula using our formula chart to make sure that we are choosing the formula that matches the shape that it's asking us about. And then that we plug in our numbers and then we solve. It's the same steps every time. I want to see on your paper, you write a formula, you plug in your numbers, and you solve. And that should get you your answer. So hopefully this was helpful in reviewing all of those. You're going to continue along with the Nearpod. Next, you're going to do a couple of practice problems using these formulas. So make sure that each time you're using your paper to write the formula down using that formula chart to help you and solving it step by step, just like the formula tells you. Good luck.